Hey everybody, and welcome back to Drew's Automobile Wonders. And we have finally gotten to a vehicle that I've been wanting to review since I started the series of vehicles that I have owned and no longer do. This was my 1967 Ford F100, and it was definitely, without a doubt, one of the most fun vehicles I've ever owned. And I'm going to proudly take you through a transformation of my time that I took fixing it up and sort of restoring it. I'm going to disclaim here, though, that it was definitely not perfect, and it was a daily driver. I drove it year-round, and we'll get to that in a minute, where I kind of winterized it and prevented it from rusting again and stuff like that and so on. But first of all, I want to take you through the initial, big restoration bit of it. Here's when I first brought it home. It was a light blue. I think the paint was faded on it, of course. I think it was darker than that. Well, the interior kind of showed it a little bit darker, but it was quite the pile of cornflakes. It was very rusty, and the grill was kind of cool. And I was going to leave it like that, all kind of surface rust like that, because it was kind of a patina effect. Same with that bumper, but I decided that, hey, I'm going to completely redo the whole thing paint-wise. So, and here's the back of it. It had a trailer hitch on it. Definitely was like a dealership installed, welded on trailer hitch. It was not bolted together whatsoever. It was all welded to the frame. So, and that bumper was very, very rusty. It was pretty wasted. So we ended up ripping that off of there. I'll get to pictures of that in a minute. And the biggest thing, half the reason I bought this truck was because it is a 3 on the tree, as you can see in this picture right here. A lot of people my age do not know how to drive one of these, and it was great because I could leave the keys in the truck and I knew nobody was going to be able to steal it because nobody knows how to drive it, except for people older, obviously, that were around in that time. And here's what the floors looked like when I pulled the vinyl off the floor, the coverings off, and it was pretty bad. And we bought this. I bought this in the middle of winter, and it was January, and it was supposed to be a winter beater. But I decided, and I looked at it, and I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna fix this thing up, and I'm gonna make it a whole new truck again, and give it a whole new life, as it should. These old vehicles are going to be hard to find in the future, and you want to hold on to these. Especially with, and I don't mean to exploit opinions now, but, I'm not too fond of many new vehicles nowadays, so I kind of like to give the old ones new life, and we'll get to more of that in the future. But anyways, these are the pictures of how bad the rust was. As you can see, the bed was pretty hollow. You could take the sides of that bed and shake them, and it would move the bed. The whole bedside would flex back and forth. That's how bad that bed was rotted out. So what we ended up doing, and I'll get to more pictures here in a minute, is we ended up cutting the bed apart, and and here's the engine that was in it. It was a 300 inline 6, and as you can see, there was homemade inner fenders. Those were not the original inner fenders, but and I ended up recycling them in a way, and we'll get to that. But yeah, it was a 300 inline 6. It was all stock, single barrel carburetor, as you can see. And I ended up eventually doing work to this motor. It wasn't much. It was just kind of, besides the work that I did to it, restoring it, I put some performance stuff on it afterwards. Long after I had the truck back on the road, after completely redoing it, the body and stuff. But this was a pre-smog motor, as a 67 was, and it made about 170 horsepower and 280 foot-pounds of torque. Very low-end, potent motor. Little engine that could. Anyways, here's my truck sitting in the driveway. I think this is when I was getting ready to tear it apart. Actually, in fact, it was. I had the plasma cutter sitting right there, getting ready to cut the bed apart. That plasma cutter, by the way, came in real handy with this. But as you can see, it was very bad rust-wise. The pictures don't do it justice. The fenders had really, really bad Swiss cheese pinholes in them. The bed had really bad Swiss cheese pinholes in them, and the bottoms of the doors were completely gone. And it was just kind of doing that flappy flap with the outer panel. I mean, there's all the rust spot or the weld spots were popped apart, or rotted apart, and it was a disaster. Those doors were. The thing is, those were 67 exclusive doors. Every year after, they had doors that were different, and I'll get to that too. But as you can see here is where I started cutting into it, and I started cutting the bed off. And this was when we first started using the plasma cutter. We first got it for this, and let me tell you, a plasma cutter comes in serious handy for this stuff when you want to get it done. You want to get it done relatively quickly. So as you can see, we completely cut the bed down. We cut the whole side. We cut both sides off of it as a whole, and it was, you had to avoid getting tetanus, of course, but we ended up cutting the bed sides off first, and then we eventually made our way to the floor and cut it up, because the braces, or what was left of them, were there to get cut up as well. And as you can see here, I started soda blasting the frame after we got the bed completely off, and there's the difference it made. It was kind of a comparison. The left side, obviously, that's the blasted side, and the right side is the rusty side. Now, the back of the frame, I will admit, was a little bit soft, but it wasn't rotted. It was just, kind of it was flexible. It wasn't rotted, but it was very flexible right there where the bumper hung. It was right at the very end where the bumper hung, but it was nothing to worry about. And then we have the bed sides. Obviously, I removed them separately, and they just kind of sat there until we pitched them. I kept the tailgate, and I ended up fixing that up. We'll get to that in a minute. Then we started tearing apart the front end on it, started cutting the fenders away. We just took the plasma cutter and started cutting everything off. Anything that wasn't going back on the truck was getting cut off. The inner fenders, the core support, the outer fenders. The outer fenders were easy because it was just so thin. You just took the plasma cutter and it cut right through it. And there was no inner. This was not a double-walled truck, obviously. This was pre-double walled days, unless you had the Chevy. The Chevy was the first one to have that. The GM trucks had the first double-walled panels, which this wasn't. This was all single-layer, single-walled parts, which was really nice. As you can see, we ended up taking all the front fenders and stuff off, and then we got to that, and then we flipped the truck around and backed it into the garage, and then proceeded to start taking the doors and the seats and all that stuff off. And then we ended up pitching the doors, and I took all the mechanics out of the doors because I know they were still good. I even still have the panels, the original panels to them, sitting in the garage to this day. I've been trying to get rid of them, but I don't want to give them away. But as you can see, we ended up taking the seat out, everything but the steering wheel, just so we can kind of turn it for now. And then what we ended up doing was we ended up pulling the motor out, and that was a pretty easy job. We just kind of, I just kind of chained it on there and put the chains on there and drained all the fluids out and pulled it out. It was a very simple task. The thing is, helps when you have no front end on the truck, of course. And there it is, just kind of sitting there. What we ended up doing is we ended up going through the bottom end of the motor. I'll post some pictures here in a minute. But the hardest part was the transmission between the two. Because the transmission, you would think, as tiny as it is, you at first go, oh man, this thing's really little. And then you unbolt it, and then you realize it's a 303 top loader transmission, which is a cast iron case about half-inch thick, and it's heavier than it looks. So it's like, oh, as soon as you pull it down and put it on, rest it on your chest, and then you roll out from under the vehicle. I decided to take pictures of the floor pans when I cut them out. I finally got to work on the floor pans and cut them out. The floor pans were very rotted out, as you can see, and I just took pictures of them like this for comparison because I wanted to do a side-by-side with the new floor pans, and it puts it into perspective how rotted out these floors really were. And it kind of sucked because these floors were kind of because it was my first time doing it, and these floors were kind of interesting deal trying to get out of there. Cutting them out was quite the task. It took some time, but ended up getting them out of there. And had to get the cab supports out, and with everything rotted out, we had to get creative and hold the cab up in a way too. As you can see, look how rotted out that was. And as you can see right there, above that that lip right there that's rotted out, as you can see, this cab was borderline too far gone, and in fact, it was. It was something that any guy that wanted a perfect job would have tossed the cab and found a more solid cab to put on it. But I made do. As you can see, the rockers were very, very rotted out still. And we'll get to that in a minute. The thing is, we ended up cutting out a couple of sections in this that they did not make replacement parts for, and we had to get creative and either utilize a lot of Bondo or recycle certain panels, which I'll get to in a minute. As you can see, I Clecoed the floor pans in and mocked it up. The floor pans kind of went in there. I didn't cut it exactly. In fact, I didn't cut the floor pans at all, really. I kind of just welded them in there because, I just kind of layered it over. I didn't, weld it exactly to point, but I kind of like the double layered idea because it makes it a little more rigid to me, and it's where the sun don't shine, so I wasn't too worried about imperfections. And then, as you can see, I welded it in finally, and it was very satisfying after, because I ended up welding it all in. It was all nice and solid, and, felt pretty to me. And then I proceeded to start putting in the rockers and mocking them up, and then tacking them in. As you can see, that hole right there was a rot spot, was a major rot spot, and I ended up putting certain pieces of metal there, and once again, I'll get to those in a minute. As you can see, the rotted out rockers were replaced, kind of. Like I said, there's a piece right there, as you can see up there, where it goes up into the A-pillar, where it doesn't really have any parts that they make for it, and we ended up getting creative, just like we got creative with the front here. As you can see, we used a piece of channel iron to reinforce the firewall because they didn't make a panel long enough to go up into that firewall right there that far, and it was still kind of weak right there. So what we ended up doing was we ended up bolting and welding a piece of channel iron on each side of the cab to help hold up the cab supports, and we did the same thing, as you can see, from the other side. Another thing we ended up doing was, as you can see, that cab mount right there on the frame, we had to weld in a washer, heavy-duty washer, because it was pretty soft and kind of eroded away. I don't believe we ended up doing the same thing to the other side because I think it was quite solid. The driver's side was more rusty than this side, but what we ended up doing was we ended up welding a washer in there, and it ended up pretty nice. So there's how we held the cab up. As you can see, we held up with a plank, and we ended up using I believe it was a jack stand, and we kind of evened out the weight so that the cab wouldn't teeter on that, and it worked perfectly. I mean, I could sit in the cab and it wouldn't even move, so it worked out great. And here's more pictures of the frame where we welded that washer in, and I ended up painting over it with POR, and once again it worked out perfectly because it was not weak or anything like that, and the hole was even the same diameter as far as I remember, and I liked how it turned out. So we ended up not needing to trash or scrap the frame because of that. So as you can see here, I started painting everything, started putting POR over the firewall, and as you can see, I got the cab mounts mounted, and then I ended up I welded them to those channel irons, as I discussed, and it was pretty stout. It was quite reinforced, and I'm glad we got creative like that. And here's the cab corners, and much like the floor pans, I layered them over the old cab corners after kind of cutting them down. I cut them down beyond, to a point where there's no rust, but Other than that, I kind of layered over them, but it still matched up pretty nicely, and it ended up looking pretty good when I was done for what it was. It was definitely a lot more solid, but yeah, I ground down those spot welds, and then I then got to bondoing later on. But before I did that, I ended up recycling those inner fenders and making patch panels for, yes, those holes that I pointed out earlier. I had to get creative because they did not sell any patches for this part of the floorboard, and it was, once again, it was pretty far gone, kind of like where I had to weld and bolt and weld those channel irons above the cab mounts. I did the same thing to the passenger side, as you can see. But fortunately for me, not only was it galvanized, it was recycled, you know, so it was kind of a win-win. I cut up those inner fenders, those homemade inner fenders that came on the truck, and I'm like, you know what, I could still use this kind of metal, so I think it'll come in big handy. So, and that's what I ended up doing. And then I ended up, I took a mallet to those floor pans and made them match up. Then what I did was I started the bondoing process. And as you can see, I put screening down because, once again, they did not sell this piece. They only sold the straight pieces for the rockers. They did not sell an angle. So I had to make do and paint it up and sand it down the best I could. And then I started to proceed with bondoing. And as you can see right there, I used more inner fender recycling. I did the same thing at the driver's side. You just couldn't see it very well. I had to patch up the A-pillar a little bit as well. So I had to get creative once again. But it looked pretty good when it was done versus what it was. The Bondo was kind of bubblegum, but the welding and everything was alright. As you can see here, I started I finally started getting the bondoing the cab up. I would have ended up sanding that down. It did not look like that when it was done. I just took pictures of it to show my progress at the time, which thankfully I was able to take all these pictures, by the way. And as you can see, I also started to paint the frame as well. I used POR 15, of course, and it came out pretty nice. And there's where I started sanding it down. As you can see, the dust everywhere. And Bondo is very messy. It's kind of like the anti-seize. It gets everywhere. And here's the doors I ended up getting. Now, the thing about these doors is I ripped them off an F600 because they were almost rust-free. I had to do a little bit of patching on them, but they were still very solid versus the ones that were on the truck. It was nice, though, because the F600's, the cab set up higher, so these doors were less prone to rusting. So it worked out for me. I just carried over the mechanics because the mechanics in these doors were all seized up. And the mirrors, I had to remove the mirror brackets. One door had a huge dent in it, and I kind of pounded it out the best I could before going over it with Bondo. And once again, it didn't look perfect, but it looked good enough. Here's the flatbed that I was mocking up. I mocked it up at Home Depot. Because I didn't have a bed yet, this is what I went with. And I started mocking up. I used all those pieces right there. And then, meanwhile, back with the doors, here's pictures of the bondoing that I had to do. And once again, it was very light. It wasn't anything too serious. Luckily, the doors didn't have holes in them from trim or anything, so I didn't have to worry about that. I did have to worry about that on the bed, though, and I'll get to my new bed here in a few. But here's the, as you can see, I just used a piece of cardboard and just sat them on sawhorses and bondoed away at them. And once again, it wasn't perfect, but it was cool. Once it was done, it looked way better than it did. So I was very happy with it, and there's where I started sanding it down. And as you can see, there's a big dent right there where the mirror was. I don't know if somebody caught the mirror on something or what back in the day, but that's how it was. I was thankful to get these doors because they do not sell door shells for these trucks like they do the Chevys. But however, I was able to score these new fenders that were repopped off of eBay for $300 for the set, when they were generally about $250 to $300 a piece at the time. So I scored on those. That made up for a lot. And then I ended up painting them. And here's where it gets interesting: is I used Plasti Dip, believe it or not. I wanted a matte black finish on the truck. I kind of wanted like an old school rut rod kind of look, uh, but nothing too crazy though. I wanted it all stock still, but just the paint job was going to be different. And then, as you can see, I bondoed up the hood. I started bondoing that up. Now the hood was pretty interesting because it was rotted out in the back more, and it was not rotted out in the front by any means. It was weird. As rotted out as this truck was, the hood was completely solid in the front, and that's usually where they start rotting out, as at the front of the hood. So I was thankful for that, because that would have been a pain in the ass to fix. But it would I probably would end up just getting a new hood anyways. But as you can see, I sanded it down. It looked pretty nice. I was very happy with, considering the fact that I never used Bondo before until this point. And then I ended up painting the grill. Then I ended up painting the bumper. Everything was going to be a flat matte black finish, and it turned out pretty nice, given it was all rattle can. I rattle can the whole truck, but Plasti Dip is pretty good for the most part at kind of blending itself together, so you didn't really see any streaks. There's the hood and everything after I painted it all. I painted over everything. I even painted over the emblems, which I guess I shouldn't have, because it kind of just made it look too bland. But hey, I like an old work truck. Chrome doesn't get you home, as they say. So, and meanwhile, we started tearing apart the bottom end of the engine, and we found out, yes, the bearings were pretty coppery looking. They were pretty worn out, so it definitely needed bearings. And the crankshaft, we had that taken out, and we sent that out to get it ground down and turned so that it was all even again. Because if you looked at it, it was pretty cheese to match the the bearings. I actually still have one of those bearings. I made it into a kind of a keychain, because you know how they have the hole for the oil passage. I made a good keychain for it. But as you can see, we didn't take the pistons out or anything. We just did the bottom end. It was we didn't take the rods out or anything like that and go over that, put new pistons in it, which it would have been cool if we did. I kind of regret not doing that. I mean, we were there, but hey, I just wanted the motor to run. And these 300 inline sixes, they do not care. that motor probably would have still ran the whole entire time I owned the truck if I didn't even open it up. But it was cool. I gave it a nice forward blue paint job, and it wasn't, I just sprayed over kind of everything, kind of avoided it, specific things. There's the inner fenders. Those inner fenders were about $200 a piece. The most expensive parts I think I bought for that truck, aftermarket wise. So that was pretty interesting. We ended up repainting the cab red. I wanted a red cab, and it turned out very, very nice. However, the paint was we didn't really put a primer down, so the paint kind of chipped away at the slightest hit or anything, like when my keys bounced into the dashboard when I turned it in the cylinder in the dash, because it was a dash ignition. We put it ended up chipping away the paint a little bit. But here's the first time we rolled it out, and I ended up putting the doors on it, and then I ended up putting the mirrors on it, and then I put the bed on it, and I mocked it up. I did not put it down just yet, I don't believe here. I think I did. I ended up putting the bed down. That way, so we could put everything on the bed of it until we finished the whole thing. We also had to make room for the engine too, so I believe we left this outside for a little bit, and then I ended up putting the engine in. It was very easy. I mean, that engine went right in there, and the engine weighs more than you think, even for it being a 6-cylinder. It weighs pretty good amount, but it balanced on the cherry picker pretty nicely. And then, as you can see, we ended up putting a new core support in, put the inner fenders in, and had that all put together. And once again, this ain't a double-walled vehicle, so we ended up putting single plate. It was all single parts. There was no double walling to these body panels whatsoever. And as you can see, we put the bed back on and finally got it on the road and got it running. So, and it looked pretty good. I was impressed with it, given that I didn't have the actual fleet side bed for it. anymore for that time, and I ended up driving it an entire winter. And those lights were given to me by a buddy of mine in racing, and it worked out perfectly because those lights even had a license plate bracket on them. So I ended up using those temporarily. Once again, this bed was kind of a temporary thing till I got an actual bed for it. And it drove, believe it or not, it drove in the snow relatively well, given how light it was in the back. I ended up putting my, I ended up putting my track day wheels on it and then chaining them down. And as you can see, there's the transformation. The hubcaps, I ended up painting those. Just a basic silver, or I think it was the chrome in a can, rattle can chrome. But, just to match it up. And I even ended up hand paint marking the tires too. As you can see, there's the bed. I ended up going to get it all the way out in Onstead, and I live in Dearborn, Michigan. But Onstead, Michigan's about not far from Michigan International Speedway, out there, kind of in the middle of the state. So south middle of the state. So I ended up going all the way out there, picking it up, and I carried the bed on the bed all the way back. And it was a clean bed. And the guy was cool because he had a whole hillside on his parents' farm was littered with classic Ford truck parts. Everything from the 40s to the 70s. To the 80s, I take that back. I kind of lost his number, though, and I'm bummed out about it because I told him, I said, if I need anything else, I want to call you and see if you got it. I'm not afraid to buy anything off you. And then I ended up putting the bed on after painting it. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find much. I wasn't able to find any photos in my archives for the bed painting. I remember taking a couple, but that's okay. I ended up painting the bed just like the truck. I did end up putting cheap liner in it. I discovered that it was more stout if you brushed it in versus rolling it in, because it did end up chipping away a lot throughout the time that I owned it. Then I ended up getting a bumper for it from the junkyard. It was off of a brick nose. 87 and 91, I believe. And then there it is, complete and done. And it's funny because I had broken up with my girlfriend at the time, and it's believed that she or somebody she knew came and vandalized the truck by keying it in the door. As you can kind of see the streaks a little bit there from where I patched it over, but for the most part, you couldn't really tell the difference. And yeah, it got keyed, and then I ended up spraying it over. I'm like, joke's on them, because it's just a rattle can job, So as long as I ain't breaking out any windows or flattening tires or anything like that, the joke's on them, because I don't care. I'll just paint right back over it, which is kind of what I want to do with my. I'm scared to do to my 70 is get I have a 1970 Chevy right now, and I plan to get it repainted, but I'm kind of scared having it painted better than this, but I'm still going to do it. And it was very photogenic too. I love this truck because it was very fun to drive, very photogenic, and I had never owned a vehicle this old before, and a lot of people appreciated it, especially, I get waved at and so on and so forth. And I ended up picking up that steering wheel. This truck went through 3 different steering wheels throughout my ownership. I finally picked up the one that I wanted. I ended up breaking the stock one that was in it, so I had to replace it with but I wanted an original to that year steering wheel that would have came in it rather, so it looked better, it would look more fitting. And I also put this truck to work too. I wasn't afraid to put this truck to work. I hauled a lot of stuff in the bed of this thing, including engines and transmissions, and it was very useful for being a half-ton. I was going to tow my race car with it, but I ended up getting rid of it before I did, and it was a very it was, I don't want to say it was incapable of towing my race car, but I think it would have struggled a little bit in terms of the suspension, because the suspension was very soft, and once again, it was only a half-ton, so I kind of understood it. Yes, I drove it in the winter, but I gave it a lot of rust coating, or anti-rust coating underneath. And the engine, I ended up putting an Offenhauser intake, as well as a Holley 4-barrel and headers on it. I didn't go into the engine. I just put, what they would consider bolt-on stuff. and it woke it up quite a bit. Once again, this engine stock was 170 horsepower and 280 foot-pounds of torque. So it was probably, the torque was probably closer to 300 with that intake and the exhaust and everything in between. It was kind of just everything together. The combination was those Offenhauser intakes are sweet too. It's just a real pain in the ass to put together because these engines, for those who don't know, you have to kind of hold the intake and the manifold or headers, whatever you're using, in place because they use the same bolts, which is kind of a pain, but it is what it is. And they're not holes; they're just kind of they hook to one another. There's a picture of my truck with the G8. I ended up going out to a car show that day with both of them because they were right around the corner at the park that I live next to. Speaking of parks, and there I was playing in the snow. I ended up taking a lot of vintage looking video of it, and then I kind of freeze framed it and paused it, and it looked, that kind of picture right there, I got told it looks like an old farm or something, you know, and I'm in the middle of the field, but it's actually a city park. And then I went to a leaf pile in the fall where they dispose of the leaves, and I kind of played in them a little bit, as you can see here. But yeah, all in all, I love this truck. It was definitely one of my favorite trucks. I miss this truck. I kind of regret getting rid of it. But at the same time, you know, it kind of worked out because now I have my dream truck, which I'll get to. It's a 1970 Chevy C20, the Glamour truck, or the Action Line, they call them. To me, one of the most beautiful trucks, actually the most beautiful design truck of all time. But I think this truck definitely holds a close second to me. And I definitely want to get another bump side like it at one point. But definitely something that I appreciate is the fact that this truck got me into something that's really grown to be a passion of mine, and that's, you know, fixing up old vehicles, ideally old trucks. And they're very easy. They're full on frame, of course, so, you know, they're a lot more easy to fix up and restore than, say, a car or something like that, because it's just simply a lot more involved, which I'm not afraid to do, but I definitely will take a truck over a car any day to do this kind of work too and give it a new life. But anyways, thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoy the video. It's kind of a walkthrough. Hopefully some people, if they need reference for what to expect on restoring one of these or fixing them up, I hope this video is somewhat informative, even though, once again, my truck wasn't a museum product by far. I just hope, you know, somebody was able to kind of at least learn a little bit of how things go together on these, as they're quite different from, you know, other trucks that, and I can speak from experience, because I ended up restoring another truck, a much better, and I'll get to that video eventually here, as another episode of my Vehicles I've Owned series. And meanwhile, everybody stay safe and take care, and we will see you around later.